want to start on the health side first. You obviously have a background in science. You've been watching this play out, on Twitter and in the headlines, et cetera. What's your general sense as to what's happened and kind of where we are with the virus right now?
Well, I've spent the entire pandemic thinking in 2 weeks I'll know. It's just been in 2 weeks I'll know. So it first caught, there's always something coming out of the Chinese wet markets, right? There's always, those guys will eat anything that wiggles, right? And so what caught my attention is the minute they shut down Wuhan, I said, oh my God, we just shattered the supply chains, right? So I started reaching out to friends. I got an email from Einhorn, who's been so generous with his time, and Stephen Roach, who's been so generous with his time. And we started sort of swapping war stories, trying to figure it out. What did it mean? But I was convinced that you can't shut down a major region of China without destroying the global supply chain. Now, it hasn't been as bad as I thought. But I ran into tons of people who said, we're not getting the chips we need. We're not getting this. We're not getting that. There could be a delayed reaction. There's even theories out there. They said they shut everything down so no one would be demanding the supplies, right? What an interesting thesis that is, right? And I'll entertain any idea until I shoot it down. So in any event, the guy who I think got it right was, again, one of your former interviewees, Jim Bianco. He was on it fast and furious. And so we're swapping a lot of emails, mostly one directional, mostly him just telling me stuff and me going, I agree. And I think it's been devastating. And it reminds me, it's like someone put a stick of dynamite in a turkey and blew it up, and then someone else came along and said, put it back together now, right? It doesn't work that way. So I think we destroyed the global economy in a very big way. And I think that the people who think we're just going to reassemble it are dreaming. Now, I could be wrong, but it certainly is a strong opinion. Bianco said one day on Twitter, and he got crap for it, he said, 90% recovery is a disaster. And people said, what are you, greedy? What are you? And I had to chime in, and I said 90% recovery means 10% drop in GDP. That's a disaster. And so yeah, so I think we're going to have lots of missing jobs that don't ever come back. You can't run a restaurant at 50% capacity. You can't run a movie theater if everyone has to watch with masks on. And so the only way we come back is everyone just says, screw it. And the world, which by the way, I think they've collectively are trying to do, right? One of the questions I've been trying to understand is why about 2 weeks ago, all of a sudden with no change in the biomedical story, all of a sudden it just became now we're going to open up. And I'm going, what was that? Right? There was no, all clear signal that was put out there.
Do you think it had to do with just it literally got warmer in various areas? So like literally it's just springtime hit?
Maybe. It could also be, remember Arab Spring? Remember what caused Arab Spring? Some Tunisian guy lit himself on fire. Just one flammable Tunisian. and that triggered. And so it could be something like that blonde, relatively hot hairstylist who said, I'm not closing. And it could be as hell yeah, the shot at Lexington and Concord, who knows what, but it just changed. And all of a sudden people stopped wearing masks except in logical places. So you see them at the store, but not walking down the street. And so there's just this sea change that occurred. It was like people were just ready. There were a lot of people who were critical saying that's really selfish to do that. And I'm going, these people don't know how they're going to feed their kids. There's nothing selfish about that. And so it's really just sit there with a paycheck and criticize people who live. And we know, what was the stat? Something like 40% of the people couldn't put $400 together if they had to, right? Those people now can't put 50 cents together.
Well, I think you're bringing up a couple of issues, right? So the first is one of the things that I'm personally interested in your opinion, right, is you spend all day looking at science and you come from a mindset where there's a hypothesis, you test it, and it's either correct or it's not, and you move on, you kind of rinse and repeat that process over and over again.
Right.
What we saw with the virus was a number of people who they put forth these models that I'll call them hypothesis, right? Because no one really knew what was going to happen, but they were trying to predict how bad could this be. And you'd see models that said, worst case, base case, and best case type situations. What I think now has transpired is we've got, a month or 2 months of data in the lockdown, and people are saying, wait a second, you're telling me that, an order of magnitude less people have actually died than you originally said, right? And there's almost like this shock and awe factor of people were anchored on such big numbers, millions of Americans dying. And now all of a sudden they see the numbers. And by the way, there's people who have died, right? There's a lot of people who have died, actually. It's just not nearly as much. And it looks actually like a small number compared to what the original predictions were. And do you think that like the psychology of that plays into people just being like, look, open the damn, economy up?
Yeah, you lied to us, I think is another way of putting it. I don't know if this is true yet. So one of the things I will be watching for and have been thinking about is if the shutdown really did heroic things to stop the spread, well, first and foremost, you're going to have to explain why other regions of the world aren't a killing field, right? So we're not, I heard Mexico has 3 times as many cases, BFD, it's still not a big number. And China supposedly also stopped having cases, but everyone said, China's just a bunch of liars, we can write them off. And then all of a sudden you go, but maybe they're not, right? Maybe the damn thing has stopped. Maybe it ran its course in China. And so now, so the other problem we have is, and I've been talking to a lot of biochemists. One of my former students is a biochemist at Harvard now, and he, and I spent hours on the phone chatting with him about how the virus works and how it, gets the RNA into the cells and how the incubation. This guy's glued to it, and he was pretty nervous about the whole thing. So I can't say that the serious biochemists weren't nervous about it. But I was waiting for the numbers to unequivocally, unambiguously exceed anything normal. So when it was at 5,000 or 10,000, we're still sub-flu numbers. Now I think we're above flu numbers, but there's a problem with the data being so bad. So the data is bad at 2 levels. First of all, what's the comorbidity? At this point in time, some 87-year-old guy crashes his motorcycle, they're calling it COVID. When some guy dies of a heart attack because he had COVID, is it really a COVID death? If he had gotten simply a mild case of the flu, he would have died. And so you don't know how to count. Second of all, I've heard there's over 90 different tests. Now, I got tested because I'd been feeling crummy for a while. And I said, why not? My son had. And so we said, why not? We went and got tested, and they did it all wrong. They did it all wrong. They, if you do the nasal test, they're supposed to jam it back there to the point where you feel like an Egyptian mummy in the making, right? And there's a name for when they pull the brains out through your nose. And they just swabbed it around her nose, and that was it. I go, that's not going to test for anything. But 90 different tests, you got Elizabeth Holmes probably running tests out there. And so it's going to be garbage data, right? They're all testing for different markers. You can have corona flavored RNA in there and it's testing positive. And who is it? 4 base pairs, 5 base pairs. And my former students said, they don't yet have a good one. And I'm going, really? We're doing a lot of statistical analysis. Then you got that guy, Neil Ferguson, who's out there bullshitting to impress his 38-year-old girlfriend. But it's even worse than that. Turns out she's a sort of as I understand it, a professional activist. So she's out there, with all these big causes. All of a sudden, Neil wants serious action out of this chick now. And so his numbers that apparently got entire nations to change their policy was because he wanted to get laid, right? How many times has that destroyed a nation, by the way?